Well, hello everyone. You all awake and warm?
Yeah.
See if I can maybe warm it up a bit here. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that this conference is happening. It's certainly an important time. I live in Bath, Maine, that has a manifestation of the military-industrial complex, a place called Bath Iron Works, where they build Navy Aegis destroyers. And I'll talk more about them in a little while. But for many years, I lived in Florida for 30 years. I moved to Maine with my partner, Mary Beth, who's speaking tomorrow. We moved to Maine about 8 years ago. People ask me, you were living in Florida and you moved to Maine? Why'd you do that? And I said, because of the weather. So, anyway, the Global Network was created in 1992. At that time, I was working for the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, working on space issues. And we realized that in Florida, having a space center so near to us, we realized that the space, the weaponization, the nuclearization, militarization of space was moving forward quickly, and that we needed to do more to internationalize resistance and knowledge first, and resistance against it. And in Colorado Springs was really the only other group in the country that was working on space issues, a group called Citizens for Peace in Space, because the Space Command was headquartered at that time there before moving to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska. So we created the Global Network in 1992, and today there are about 150 affiliated groups all over the world that are a part of it. I want to talk to you today about Washishu. Washishu is a Lakota word. The Lakota are often called the Sioux Indians out in the Dakotas. When they first met the white man, their first contact, they say, was with this white man that in the middle of the winter came into one of their teepees and stole all their food. And in this particular teepee, they had stored the fat for the really worst part of winter when they had run out of everything else and they were just living on fat. And so Washishu meant the one who steals the fat, the greedy person. And so today in the modern Indian movement, they use the word Washishu to mean corporations that steal from the people, that steal from the land, and that steal the resources. And so this is what I want to talk to you about today, the Washishu. I want to tell you a story from South Dakota, set in the years 1877, 1881, when soon after gold had been discovered in the Black Hills, what the Lakota people called the Pahasapa, the heart of the universe, their sacred ground that had been given to them by treaty for as long as the grass grew green. But gold was discovered there, and the military, U.S. Army, people like General Custer were sent there to clear a military highway between the east into the Black Hills so that the prospectors could go in and get the gold. Clear out the Indians. Clear out the people. And pretty much all the tribes, all the clans had been brought into the reservation by 1877, with the exception of two, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. But finally, even Crazy Horse in 1877 was brought onto the reservation. As his people were starving to death, the whites coming into the Black Hills had pretty much gotten rid of all the game. The buffalo had long been decimated in the years before by the buffalo hunters. Firing at the buffalo from the trains, just killing legions of buffalo, taking the hides, and leaving the meat to rot on the plains. And so Crazy Horse decided to go onto the reservation. And the deal that he made with the U.S. Army was that he would give up his guns and his horses. Virtually their entire way of life. And he was brought into a teepee on the reservation with essentially nothing. Going to be given provisions by the federal government, as it turned out, blankets with holes in them and smallpox virus, flour with bugs in it, rotting meat and bacon. And so his people were even starving there on the reservation as well. And in 1881, Sitting Bull finally came onto the reservation for the same reason. But a problem ensued. And the problem was that the military-industrial complex that existed at that time, it was making money first off the Civil War and then off the expansion of war out into the West, out into the Great Plains, out into Texas, where they were wiping out the native people there. As these Indian wars were brought to a close, these weapons corporations were seeing a dry up in their funding. And so they created a public relations campaign across the country. They had artists do rendering stories of Crazy Horse back on the warpath, raping women, killing children, marauding against the white settlers that were coming out west. And stories were written in all the major newspapers across America. Crazy Horse, back on the warpath. And so the American people rose up in indignation. And the Congress had to move into motion, had to move into gear and reappropriate more money to fight Crazy Horse, who had risen up out in South Dakota. When in fact, he was sitting in his teepee on the reservation. Well, I would submit to you that the military-industrial complex has an MO. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an FBI agent. I wanted to fight organized crime. And so I thought I'd get a head start on everybody else. So I organized a correspondence course, or I subscribed to one. I learned about fingerprinting, and I learned about FBI definitions. MO, modus operandi. Every criminal has an MO. And so this military-industrial complex that we're talking about today, which has been in existence essentially since the first wars, Indian wars on this continent in the northeast of the United States. This military-industrial complex is a criminal syndicate in operation today in our country. In more contemporary times, we saw it manifested itself with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in Vietnam. Shock and awe and the lies about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The stories today, we know that Al-Qaeda is down to about 100 people, they say, in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But still, the military-industrial complex creates rationales and reasons to continue that war. And now China is being set up as the next boogeyman, as the American people are being made to fear the rising Red Army. And in each case, when this military-industrial complex moves into gear, what we see is destroyed societies. We see new weapon systems tested and produced. Go back to the Indian Wars and you see the repeating rifles and the Gagnon guns created. The buffalo destroyed by new high-powered, long-distance rifles. In the Persian Gulf War that began in the early 90s, they call it the first space war because for the first time, space technology was used to coordinate and direct an entire war. They say that before the war even started with Saddam Hussein in the early 90s, that the Space Command had pre-identified all of his military targets by space technology. Even to the point that they knew where his military communication underground cables were in the desert. They could see them from space as well. And in the first 2 to 3 days of the war, the United States bombed more than 95% of those military targets. In the first 2 to 3 days of the Persian Gulf War, that lasted for a long time, for months. And so what they used the rest of the war for, I don't know if anybody's working on this mic, but suddenly the sound just jumped way up. You could maybe turn it back down a little. In the remaining weeks and months of that war, the United States tested out many new weapons gun systems. Used so many cruise missiles at Titusville, Florida, at the McDonnell Douglas plant, they were working 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, to resupply the cruise missiles at $1 million apiece. Claire Hanrahan and I, back in those days, were arrested for protesting out in front of that very McDonnell Douglas plant. Iraq used depleted uranium. Drones are today used in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And today, as part of this new China scare, we've been hearing about cyber warfare. The idea that you can use computers to invade another country. Crawl inside of their computer, essentially. Almost, it's like hacking. Get inside so that you can shut down their air defense systems before you attack them. And they have no ability to defend themselves. All these kind of new systems created, not necessarily out of necessity, but out of desire for profit and control. A few years ago, during the Bush administration, I was watching one of my favorite TV programs, C-SPAN. And I saw a show just coming on. They introduced the speaker as the brain of Donald Rumsfeld. His strategy guy, they said he was. They said his name was Thomas Barnett, who at that time was an instructor at the Naval War College in Rhode Island. He wrote a book called The Pentagon's New Map. And in a 3-hour presentation, he laid out the following. Now, first I want to say who the audience was. It was a huge auditorium. Every seat was filled. High-level military brass from all the services. And in the introduction, they said high-level CIA people were there as well. He was there to essentially give the highest levels of the military the coming plan for the U.S. military strategy in the years ahead. And Barnett said this: because of corporate globalization of the world economy, every different country is going to have a different role in the future, a different job. He said, we're not going to make things in America anymore. We're not going to have jobs in America anymore. Because it's cheaper for the corporations to go overseas, maximize profits internationally, to build cars and clothes and shoes, refrigerators, computers, everything. He said, our role under corporate globalization will be security export. And so it's no coincidence that today in America, the #1 industrial export product of our nation is what? Weapons. And when weapons are your #1 industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line? Barnett went on to say that they're essentially going to have 2 services in the future. Because of space technology, the old distinctions between Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, he said, are being rubbed out. They're essentially going to have 2 services in the future. One he called Leviathan, whose job will be to go in, shock and awe, do a complete devastation of a particular country. And the other service, he said, will be Systems Administration, SysAd, he called it. And he said these troops will never come home. This is after we've gone in with Leviathan, completely destroyed a country. Systems Administration will go in and run the country. Yes, they'll set up a puppet government, of course, in Libya or in Afghanistan. But Systems Administration will run the country, and we will never come home. And in fact, just about 2 years ago, I read that Lockheed Martin had gotten a huge contract from the Pentagon to begin indoctrinating and training the new generation of Systems Administration warriors. He went on to say that young people in America, that angry young men who are whiling away their time because they have no jobs, would be perfect for Leviathan. Because they're angry, they're connected to computers, they'll be good at doing things like flying drones. And so basically he talked about the militarization of our culture. Now last year, I saw a manifestation of this. I heard a rumor that Sears had a new line of kids' clothes. And I went to see it with a friend because I really had to check this out. And what I discovered when I walked in the kids section of Sears, was a complete line of young kids' clothes, all military uniforms. And so the message to this younger generation is, this is all you're going to be. This is your future in America. Either flipping hamburgers or coming into the military. So they are indeed militarizing our culture. And the other thing that Barnett talked about that I think is very important is this new map. And let me describe what he said. He said there's a part of the world today that is not submitting to the authority of corporate globalization. He called it the non-integrating gap. The non-integrating gap. And he identified it. He said it's Middle East, where of course we are in Iraq today with our permanent military, and that these people are not going to be coming home. Central Asia, where we are today in Afghanistan, again, we're not coming home from there. Africa, where he said we'll be fighting 20 years from now for their oil. Well, even sooner than that, we in NATO, our lapdog, invaded Libya that has the largest supplies of oil on the African continent. And finally, he said, parts of Latin America are part of this non-integrating gap. Places like Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez is not playing ball with corporate globalization. And so he said, our job in America, under security export, will be to go into the non-integrating gap, secure it, essentially, to the benefit of corporate globalization. He said, we will not do international treaties anymore because they'll stand in our way. And he said the following, and I said to myself when I heard this quote, I said, I've got to get this taped because no one is ever going to believe me when I tell them this. But Thomas Barnett told this big audience, he said, Adolf Hitler never had to ask permission to invade another country, and we will not either. What? You heard me. And so this is why we are having endless war today. Because of diminishing resources around the world, the corporations have determined that they are going to control the oil, the natural gas, the water, the other resources in places like resource-laden Africa. And it will be our job to go in there and to secure them. And in fact, the more unemployment we have in America, the better. Because the more young people will enter the economic draft and go fight endless war to benefit the multinational corporations. And so it's no coincidence today that Virginia receives more Pentagon contracts, more Pentagon funding than any other state in the country. Followed by California in number 2, Texas in number 3, Connecticut in number 4, and Massachusetts at number 5. You might remember that right before Bush left office, there was a lot of talk about his deployment plan of so-called missile defense systems in the Czech Republic and in Poland. It was causing quite a bit of stir. And soon after Obama came into office, many people were very excited because Obama said he was not going to go forward with those deployments. And some people called me and said, Bruce, you said Obama wasn't going to be any good, but look, he's just canceled Bush's missile defense deployments. And I said, well, you got to follow the other hand of the magician. I've come to call Obama the magician because what you get on one hand is not necessarily what you get on the other hand. And soon after, what Obama did was to go to Prague, you might remember that, in the Czech Republic, where he made his disarmament speech saying that we're going to, get rid of nuclear weapons. But following that, Obama came forward with a new missile defense plan, calling for Aegis destroyers made where I live in Bath, Maine, these Navy warships outfitted with missile defense systems to be deployed surrounding Russia and China. And just this past week, Romania signed a deal with Hillary Clinton to put missile defense interceptors on ground-based launchers into Romania. Turkey signed just in the last week or two a deal with the United States to put missile defense radar systems into Turkey. Poland has already signed a deal to put Patriot 3, the third generation of Patriot missile defense interceptors, in Poland, just 35 kilometers from the Russian border. And the Obama administration has lately been sending these Aegis destroyers, outfitted with missile defense systems, into the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea, angering the Russians. The Russians are now saying that that START II treaty that we signed with you is now in jeopardy because if you continue with these missile defense deployments, Mr. Obama, we're going to pull out of that treaty. Now, what is it about this missile defense systems on the Navy Aegis destroyers that Obama likes so much? Well, right before the election, I have a dear old friend in Maine, a guy by the name of Herschel Sternlieb, a Jewish man, who said to me, "Bruce, you ever heard of the Crown family?" And I said, "No." He said, "From Chicago, the Crown family. Go home and Google them." So I did. And I discovered that the Crown family at the time of the 2008 election were the majority stockholders in the General Dynamics Corporation that owns Bath Iron Works in Maine, where I live. It was the Crown family in Chicago that discovered Obama early on, promoted him within the National Jewish constituency, raised money for him when he was just a state senator in Illinois, helped get him elected to the U.S. Senate, and then helped create his presidential campaign. As it turns out, Obama received more funding from the military-industrial complex in the 2008 election than even the war hawk John McCain did. This was reported in Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. And so the Crown family was instrumental as General Dynamics in helping to create Obama as a candidate and getting him elected. And so to me, it's no mystery or no coincidence that today Obama has said we're going to retire this one version of missile defense systems and bring in its place, on the other hand, the ones made by General Dynamics Corporation as the preferred deployment option, being used today to surround Russia. Now, why Russia? Doesn't make sense. Why restart the Cold War? Well, is it possible that part of the answer is because Russia has the world's largest supply of natural gas and also significant supplies of oil? And have we not yet learned that it is official U.S. military strategy to surround and control any part of the world that has significant fossil fuel resources? At the same time, these Aegis destroyers outfitted with missile defense systems are also being deployed by the Obama administration to surround China. Today they're being put into Japan, into South Korea, into Australia, throughout the region, the Asian Pacific region. The U.S. Pentagon is in fact doubling its military presence. Last night, Ann Wright talked about Little Jeju Island, an island just south of the Korean mainland that now has a Navy base being built there. When I myself called the South Korean embassy in Washington, and several other people that I know as well, when we called the embassy to say, stop building this Navy base, we support the Gagnon villagers who have been living in this village for 300 years, growing food, fishing, their entire way of life being disrupted now today. When we called the embassy, we were told, don't call us, call your government. They're twisting our arm and forcing us to build this base. Why does the United States want a base, a Navy base, on Jeju Island on the south side. Because as you look at a map, you see that this is a strategic location in the Yellow Sea. It's essentially the front gate, if you'll think of it that way, of the entryway for China as they import 80% of their oil on ships into their country. And the United States strategy appears to be, the Pentagon strategy appears to be, that while we might not be able to compete with China economically, if we control their access to resources, we will hold the key to their economic engine. And so by doubling its military presence in the Asian Pacific, in 2001, an article was in the Washington Post called, "For the Pentagon, Asia Moving to the Forefront." And the article said the U.S. was going to double its military presence in the region and was going to use that to manage China. And so here's China reacting, seeing this, with their just one or two military satellites up there in space, looking down, seeing this massive U.S. deployment of all kinds of militarization in the region, expanding bases in Guam, putting PAC-3, Patriot 3, third-generation missile defense systems even in Taiwan. It's kind of the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse, if you think of it. And so China is now responding, increasing its own military spending, increasing the size of its navy. And again, as Ann said last night, the United States, oh my God, look at China! Look what they're doing! What if the reverse was happening? What if China was putting military bases off the east and west coast of the United States? What if China had military bases in Canada and Mexico? We would be freaking out. We would be going, quote-unquote, ballistic. Princeton professor Aaron Friedberg, former close advisor to Dick Cheney, argued in a New York Times column on September 4th that American taxpayers must put up with whatever is needed to keep the Chinese under control. Quote, "Strength deters aggression," argued Friedberg. "This will cost money," he said. And so these missile defense systems, what I call the shield of first strike warfare, are now being used again to encircle Russia and China. This is how it works. In a computer war game, annually run by the United States Space Command, reported annually in Space News and Aviation Week in Space Technology, set in the year 2016, the United States launches a first strike preemptive attack from space, using the new weapon system called the military space plane, now under development, to replace the shuttle that has just been retired. The military space plane, carrying either nuclear or conventional weapons, flies down from orbit, drops a devastating attack on China, goes back up into space. China does admittedly have 20 nuclear missiles capable of hitting the west coast of the United States today. And in that first strike attack by the military space plane and other weapon systems by the U.S. tried to take out China's 20 nuclear missiles capable of hitting the west coast, but are not successful in hitting every one of them. China then fires their remaining retaliatory capability in a strike, and it's at that point, after the U.S. sword has been thrust into China's nuclear forces, at that point, the U.S. missile defense systems come into play. Their job, the shield, to take out the remaining Chinese nuclear forces to complete the first strike attack. And so this is the military capability that today is being developed under the name of quote-unquote missile defense. But it's also what is being war-gamed today by the U.S. Space Command and the Pentagon. China and Russia, obviously aware of what's going on, obviously aware that they're being targeted by the U.S. for a preparation of a first strike. attack. And indeed, massive money is needed to pull this off. The Pentagon and the aerospace industry have long been saying that Star Wars, the weaponization of space, moving the arms race into the heavens, will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. Now, where will that money come from? In an editorial in Space News just a few years ago, they said, look, we have a responsibility as an industry to come up with a funding source, and we have. We're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. And it is, they said, the entitlement programs that we've been talking about this weekend, which officially are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program after Bill Clinton got through with it, and then Bush, and then Obama. These are the programs that the military-industrial complex has identified for defunding in order to pay for endless war. Now, earlier today there was some mention of the new super committee in Congress, what I call the congressional coup d'etat, where 12 members of the House and Senate have now been given the power of God. The congressional super committee that will be given these extraordinary powers to cut the federal budget will be co-chaired by Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington. She's often called Boeing's senator. There are huge conflicts of interest between these committee members, these 12 people, and the military-industrial complex. The Boston Globe reported just a few weeks ago that, quote, the 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats represent states where the biggest military contractors, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Boeing, build missiles, aircraft, jet fighters, and tanks while employing tens of thousands of workers, unquote. The Globe tried to make the case that it would be a doomsday if this new super committee allowed major cuts in military spending. Senator Murray, the Democrat, got $276,200 in campaign donations from these aerospace corporations since 2007, more than any other committee member. Second place goes to Senator Max Baucus, the Democrat from Montana, at $139,100. And third place went to the Republican, Dave Camp from Michigan, who got $130,800. And the fourth spot was Skull and Bones member Senator John Kerry, Democrat from Massachusetts, at $73,500. Do you remember that election? Remember that when Skull and Bones ran against Skull and Bones? When it was George Bush against John Kerry? You remember that, right? So 3 out of the top 4 super committee members are recipients of weapons contractors' cash. 3 of the top 4 are Democrats. It's a bad situation. Coup d'etat. Coup d'etat. But I like to remind people, there's always an Achilles heel. Always is. Okay. Every giant has an Achilles heel. Every person has an Achilles heel. Every politician has an Achilles heel. And every plan for endless war has an Achilles heel. And in this case, the Achilles heel is called the big green, or what the Indians call the green frog skin. The native people said that when the white man came, he was blinded. There was a spiritual disconnection between the white man and the earth. And this is why the white man was destroying the earth, because he was blinded by his love for the green frog skin. Well, today, friends, we can no longer afford guns and butter. We now have 2 freight trains heading for a collision course. One freight train is called social progress, and the other freight train is called endless war. One of them is going to win out. Which will it be? Will it be a return to feudalism, a corporate brand of feudalism? Or will we have true democracy and social progress in our time? We do have a problem today. It's called climate change. And we need every available hand on deck to deal with climate change. We need every available dollar of our resources available to help us put a small chink in the coming reality of climate change. So instead of spending our money, now this was talked about by the first speaker today, this particular study by UMass Amherst Economics Department. $1 billion in military spending, you see, in Pentagon spending, 8,500 jobs created. You take that same $1 billion and you put it into home weatherization, something we really need where we live in Maine, where we have the oldest housing stock in the nation. You get almost 13,000 jobs. Or if you put it into mass transit, look at the number of jobs you get per $1 billion, almost 20,000 jobs. So everywhere I go, I like to ask people, which would you rather have with your tax dollars? 8,500 jobs for endless war, or 19,795 jobs building rail cars to get us out of our gas-guzzling cars so we don't have to go to war for endless war. We don't have to go to war for oil. And then we can help make a small contribution to dealing with climate change. And I have yet to find anyone in 2 years of asking this question, everywhere I go, I've yet to have one person tell me they want to keep blowing money down the rat hole of Pentagon spending. We must call for the conversion of the military-industrial complex. My partner, Mary Beth Sullivan, will be talking about that in more detail tomorrow. And fundamentally, as we do our peace work, each and every one of us, we've got to begin to integrate this jobs issue into our work. We have to talk about jobs everywhere we go. We have to talk about jobs when we talk about war. We have to talk about jobs when we talk to people about peace. We have to talk about jobs every time we open our mouth. Every time we stand on a street corner with our outdated signs that say no blood for oil and war is not the answer. It's time for us to update our signs and talk about jobs and bring our war dollars home. And if we do that, we might find that the American people, in poll after poll, are saying that economics is the biggest fear. We might find if we start talking about jobs, if we create an alternative, sustainable vision for the future and put it out there as part of our peace work, we might find that the American people might start paying attention to what we have to say once again. Thank you all very much.